In a quiet neighborhood, an old blind man walked into a small corner store and unexpectedly hit the jackpot with a lottery ticket. Consumed by greed, the cunning cashier schemed to steal it for herself. From that moment, trouble began. She grew arrogant, cursing everyone around her, convinced she was destined for wealth. But there was one thing she never saw coming. The old man had never been blind, and his true identity as a billionaire would turn her dream into a nightmare. Before we dive in, what time are you listening? Where are you from? Drop a comment below and tell me. The convenience store sat at the corner of a quiet neighborhood, its neon sign buzzing faintly as it flickered in the late afternoon light. The last stretch of sunlight filtered through the dusty glass windows, painting long golden stripes across the cramped aisles. The shelves were crowded with cheap snacks and canned food, the air faintly sour with burnt coffee and old floor cleaner. It was the kind of store people stopped at without thinking. A forgettable backdrop to ordinary lives. The bell above the door gave a hollow chime as Jerome Walker stepped inside. He cut an odd figure, tall with the slightly bent shoulders of age, his skin dark and weathered. His shirt was old and soft at the seams, his shoes worn thin. A wooden cane tapped lightly against the tiles, each step deliberate. His face was partly hidden by a pair of dark glasses, the kind that made people instinctively lower their voices and glance away with sympathy. To the neighborhood, Jerome was the quiet blind man who lived alone. They pied him, thought of him as harmless, fragile. Nobody suspected that those dark lenses hid more than clouded eyes. Nobody wondered if he could see more than he ever let on. "Evening, Mr. Walker," Megan Harris said from behind the counter. She tried for warmth, though her voice carried the sharp edge of boredom. She was in her 20s, her blonde hair tied back carelessly, her uniform apron smudged from a long shift. She wore a polite smile that did not reach her eyes that often darted toward the racks of lottery tickets hanging by the register, as though they held the key to the life she deserved. Jerome tilted his head toward her voice, his expression calm, gentle. "Evening, Megan. I think I'll take one of those scratch-offs tonight, just for the fun of it." His voice was smooth, rich, with the steady patience of someone who had lived long enough to know disappointment by heart. Megan plucked a ticket from the rack and slid it across the counter. Jerome's hand moved slowly, guided by touch, as though the world around him was felt rather than seen. He paid with a few crumpled bills and then took a coin from his pocket. His fingers lingered on the ticket with care before he began to scratch. The sound of metal scraping across paper filled the quiet store. He leaned close as if straining to hear the truth hidden in the ticket, the corners of his mouth curling into a faint, knowing smile. Megan watched absent-mindedly at first, but as the silver dust fell away, her eyes widened, her breath caught. The ticket was a winner, not just a small prize. This was a life-altering jackpot. A jolt of heat raced through her chest. She gripped the counter to steady herself, her mind spinning with what that ticket meant. She thought of her dead-end job, her bills, the future she always complained was slipping away. In her apron pocket, her fists clenched until her nails pressed hard against her palms. Jerome, behind his dark glasses, kept scratching, his movements unhurried. When he finished, he set the ticket down and slid it back toward her. "Would you mind checking it for me, Megan? These eyes don't catch much anymore." Her pulse hammered in her throat. She swallowed, picking up the ticket with a hand that trembled just enough to betray her excitement. She stared at the numbers, her mind screaming at her to seize the chance. She could almost taste the life it promised. Freedom, power, escape. Her lips curved into a smile, but her eyes glinted with something sharper. "I'm sorry, Mr. Walker," she said softly, tucking the ticket behind the counter with practiced ease. "Looks like you didn't win this time." Jerome's smile faltered. For a brief moment, he looked smaller, as though the disappointment had pressed down on him like a familiar weight. He gave a quiet sigh, shaking his head gently. "Ah, well, that's how it goes. Maybe next time." He reached for his cane, tapping it lightly as he turned. The bell chimed again when he pushed open the door, the golden sunlight catching on the lenses of his dark glasses. His figure slipped outside, swallowed by the fading glow of day. Megan stood frozen, staring at the ticket in her hand. The truth burned into her eyes, making her skin flush. Slowly, she folded it, slid it into her apron pocket, and with a quick motion scooped up a crumpled receipt and tossed it into the trash bin. To anyone who might look, it appeared she had thrown the ticket away, but her hands trembled as she pressed her palm against her pocket, feeling the edges of the prize she had just stolen. A greedy thrill coursed through her veins. She bit her lips, smiling to herself, her eyes glittering under the flicker of the neon light. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet, the air cooling into evening. Inside the store, the silence pressed in, thick with the secret that had just been born. Megan glanced at the door once more, her pulse racing. Jerome Walker had walked out into the night, looking every bit the blind, weary man. But behind those dark glasses, he had hidden more than his eyes, and she had no idea who she had just deceived. The stockroom at the back of the store was cramped and dim, a narrow space stacked high with half-empty boxes and crates that smelled of cardboard and old detergent. A single yellow bulb dangled from the ceiling, buzzing faintly, throwing weak shadows across the floor. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the coolers outside. Megan pushed through the swinging door with a burst of energy, her chest rising and falling as though she had run a mile. She leaned back against a stack of boxes and pressed her hand against her apron. The shape of the ticket was firm against her palm. The thought of it made her tremble with exhilaration. She pulled it free and stared down at the glossy surface, the bold black numbers now etched into her mind. Her lips parted as a laugh slipped out, soft at first, then sharper, filling the little room with a giddy echo. She held the ticket high above her head like a crown, whispering to herself, "This is it. This changes everything." The door creaked again. Heavy footsteps echoed in the hall. Mr. Collins appeared, filling the doorway with his broad frame. He was a man in his late 50s, hair thinning, shoulders still sturdy from years of labor. His apron was neat, his eyes watchful, always scanning, always weighing. He paused when he saw her, her flushed cheeks, her wild eyes, the ticket clutched in her hand like a lifeline. "What's going on back here?" His voice was low, steady, but there was an edge to it, the kind of tone that suggested he already smelled trouble. Megan's grin widened. She stepped forward boldly, waving the ticket as if to taunt him. "What's going on?" she said, her voice ringing with triumph. "I won, Collins." "Do you hear me? I won." Collins narrowed his eyes. "Won what, this?" She shook the ticket in the air, her laughter bubbling out again. "A jackpot. A real one. I'm done with this dump. I don't have to stand behind that counter anymore. No more dealing with small change and boring shifts. I'm out. I'm free." The way she said it made his stomach knot. Her voice was sharp, almost manic, filled with an arrogance he had never seen in her before. He took a slow step inside, folding his arms. "Where did you get that ticket?" Megan's eyes flickered for the briefest moment, but then she straightened, her jaw firm. "What does it matter?" she shot back. "It's mine. That's all you need to know. I scratched it. I won. And now I'm done here." Collins studied her closely. He had managed this store for decades, had seen desperation in customers' eyes, and seen greed eat people from the inside out. Something about the way she stood there clutching that slip of paper like it was oxygen made every warning bell in him ring. "You sound different," he said slowly. "Like someone else entirely." Megan let out a harsh laugh. "Maybe that's because I don't have to play nice anymore. I don't have to smile at strangers and scrub counters until my hands are raw. I've been waiting for this break my whole life, and it's finally here." Her voice grew louder, sharper, bouncing off the narrow walls. "Do you hear me, Collins? I don't need you or this place or anyone. I'm walking out of here, and you'll still be stuck in this little store, counting pennies while I live, like I should have been living all along." Collins's jaw tightened. He didn't reply right away. He simply looked at her, his silence heavier than words. The air between them grew thick. Megan shifted under his gaze, but her chin stayed high, her knuckles white against the ticket she refused to loosen. Finally, he said, "Be careful, Megan. Sometimes the things we think set us free end up chaining us tighter." She rolled her eyes, letting out a short, bitter laugh. "Spare me the wisdom, old man. I've been chained to this counter long enough. Not anymore." She shoved past him, the door swinging hard against the wall as she stormed into the front of the store. Collins didn't follow right away. He stood in the dim stockroom, staring at the empty space where she had stood, his chest tight with unease. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, but he couldn't yet put all the pieces together. When he finally walked to the front, Megan was already at the door. She pushed it open with a hard hand, stepping into the fading light of early evening. Her stride was quick, her back stiff with pride, her smile carved with sharp edges. She pressed a hand against her apron pocket, reassured by the weight of the fortune she believed was hers. Collins stopped at the doorway and watched her go. The bell jingled faintly as the door swung shut behind her. He stood there staring at the street, his fists curling at his sides. The quiet pressed in around him, heavier than ever. Across the street, near the corner of the store, a boy lingered. Ethan, 12 years old, shifted from foot to foot, pretending to play with a loose pebble on the ground. He kicked it forward, then chased it, his small shoulders hunched, but his eyes betrayed him. They were wide and unblinking, fixed on Megan's back as she walked away. He had seen everything. He had been outside when she slid the ticket into her pocket. He had watched her face, the sly smile she wore when Jerome left. The memory burned behind his eyes, sharp and unshakable. Ethan's hands curled into fists at his sides, his lips pressed together, his chest rising and falling quickly. He wanted to say something, to shout the truth, but the words stuck in his throat. Adults didn't listen. They brushed him off, told him he imagined things, and Megan, with her cruel smile and fierce eyes, frightened him more than he wanted to admit. So he said nothing. He bent to pick up the pebble again, rolling it between his fingers, his face pale. The silence of the street wrapped around him, heavy and secretive. Collins's eyes drifted across the lot, catching sight of the boy for a brief moment. Something about Ethan's expression struck him, something unsettled, too grave for a child. But Collins didn't ask, not yet. Instead, he turned back to the empty counter, his thoughts circling like dark clouds. Megan thought she had walked out victorious, but Collins felt it in his bones. This was not over. And Ethan, holding his secret in the dusk, knew it too. The rain had begun only a short while earlier, soft and hesitant at first, now tapping steadily against the wide windows of the corner cafe. Warm yellow light glowed inside, spilling across the wooden tables and chairs, making the space feel smaller, more intimate. The scent of roasted coffee lingered in the air, mingling with the faint sweetness of pastries resting behind a glass case at the counter. Only a handful of customers sat scattered through the room, their voices low, their glances curious, but not intrusive. Megan slipped inside, brushing a few raindrops from her sleeve. Her heart was still pounding from earlier, her mind racing with the promise of the ticket hidden in her pocket. She chose a small table by the window where the street outside blurred under the curtain of rain. She tapped her fingers restlessly against the polished wood. Every sound, every flash of movement seemed sharper tonight. She had called Tyler here with the intention of ending things. It had been on her mind for weeks, maybe months. Tyler was steady, kind, dependable. But he was also broke, stuck in a cycle of odd jobs and quiet dreams that never seemed to take flight. Megan, with her ambitions and burning hunger for more, had grown impatient with his small illness. Now, with fortune literally in her hand, she knew she no longer needed him. The door opened with a soft chime, and Tyler stepped inside. His jacket was damp from the rain, his dark hair clinging to his forehead. He spotted her immediately and smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that made his eyes brighten. He crossed the room quickly, pulling out the chair opposite her. "Megan," he said, his voice warm. "You look different tonight." She forced a smile, tight and quick. "Sit down, Tyler." He lowered himself into the chair, leaning forward, his elbows resting on the table. His hands fidgeted slightly as though he were both nervous and excited. She noticed, and a pang of guilt flickered in her chest, though it was quickly smothered by the weight of the ticket pressing against her side. "I wanted to talk to you," Megan began, her tone measured. She took a breath, steadying herself. "About us." Tyler's smile widened nervously. "Funny! I wanted to talk to you about the same thing." He reached into his jacket pocket, fumbling for something hidden there. Megan's eyes narrowed slightly. She hesitated but pressed forward. "Tyler, listen. Things between us, they're not working. You're sweet, and you've always been good to me. But—" She stopped abruptly, as Tyler pulled a small box from his pocket and placed it on the table. It was worn and scratched. The velvet cover faded, the kind of box that had been kept safe for years. Tyler opened it carefully, his hands trembling just a little. Inside rested a ring, simple and unpolished, but glinting faintly in the cafe's warm light. Megan's breath caught, her chest tightened. She stared at the ring, then at him, unable to speak. Tyler's face lit with hope as he leaned closer. "I don't have much, Megan, but I have this. It was my mother's. She wanted me to give it to the woman I love, the one I can't imagine living without. And that's you." The cafe seemed to fall silent. The hum of voices faded. The sound of rain softened as though the entire world had paused to listen. A few customers glanced over, their expressions tender. Curious, Tyler pushed back his chair and lowered himself to one knee in the middle of the cafe floor. He held the box open, looking up at her with eyes so full of hope they glistened. His voice wavered, but the words came steady. "Megan Harris, will you marry me?" For a heartbeat, Megan froze. The sight of him kneeling there, vulnerable and sincere, stirred something deep inside her. Her throat tightened. Her eyes threatened to soften. She remembered the evenings they had shared, the way he made her laugh, the comfort of his presence when she had felt most alone. For a fleeting second, she imagined saying yes. She imagined slipping the ring onto her finger and letting him hold her. Imagined a life built on small joys, quiet moments, love that asked for nothing more than to be returned. But the image of the lottery ticket crashed through her mind, blotting out everything else. Wealth, freedom, power. A life where she never had to settle, never had to struggle. Tyler's ring, sweet and sentimental, suddenly looked cheap, pitiful, like a chain that would keep her tied to the very life she despised. Her heart hardened. The warmth in her eyes vanished. She pushed her chair back sharply, the wooden leg scraping against the floor with a piercing sound. Every head in the cafe turned. Tyler blinked up at her, his smile fading, confusion creeping into his expression. "Megan?" She stood, her face cold, her voice clipped. "No, Tyler, I can't. I won't. You don't understand. I want more than this, more than what you can give me." His eyes widened, his chest rising and falling as though the air had been punched out of him. He stayed on his knees, the box still open, his hands shaking. "Megan, please, I love you. I can give you everything I have." Her lips curled in a bitter smile. "And that's the problem. You'll never have enough. Not for me." The words struck him like a blow. His face crumpled. His body sagged, but he didn't rise. He stayed kneeling, the ring trembling in his hand, his eyes glassy with pain. Megan turned away, her heels clicking against the floor. The door swung open as she pushed through, the rain spilling onto her face, cool and sharp. She did not look back. She did not hear the muffled sob that escaped Tyler as he remained kneeling, abandoned and broken in the center of the cafe. Outside, the rain had grown heavier, droplets shining under the street lamps. Megan pulled her coat tighter and walked quickly down the sidewalk, her head high, her mind clear, her hand pressed once more against her pocket, reassured by the outline of the winning ticket. Her heart beat fast, not from guilt, but from determination. The ring, the cafe, Tyler's pleading eyes. None of it mattered anymore. Only one thing mattered now: the lottery. The lottery headquarters loomed at the edge of downtown, a building of pale concrete and glass that looked more like a bank than a place where fortunes were handed out. Fluorescent lights glowed from every floor, harsh and unwelcoming against the evening sky. Megan hurried through the sliding doors, her coat damp from the rain, her steps quick and purposeful. Inside, the air was cool and sterile. The waiting room stretched wide, its walls painted a stark white that made everything feel brighter than it should. Rows of metal chairs sat neatly in lines, their steel frames hard and cold. A few other hopefuls were scattered among them, holding their tickets like fragile dreams, their faces tight with anticipation. Megan walked to the counter with her head high. Her hand slipped into her apron pocket, gripping the ticket one last time before she pulled it free. The paper felt almost alive in her fingers, pulsing with promise. She placed it on the counter with deliberate care, her voice calm but firm. "I'd like to redeem this." Behind the counter, Mr. Reynolds adjusted his glasses. He was a man in his late 40s, his suit pressed, his posture exact. He took the ticket with steady hands, giving Megan a polite but measured nod. "Please have a seat while I verify this." Megan exhaled, a faint smile curling her lips as she turned toward the waiting area. She lowered herself onto one of the cold metal chairs, the chill biting through her coat. She crossed her legs, her foot tapping restlessly against the floor. The other claimants sat quietly, their eyes downcast, but Megan's gaze wandered upward, unfocused. In her mind, the room melted away. She no longer saw the stark walls or the buzzing lights. She saw herself in silk gowns, stepping into glittering cars, her fingers heavy with diamonds. She pictured crowded restaurants falling silent when she entered, the awe and envy on strangers' faces. She imagined leaving this small life far behind, never to be tethered again. Her lips parted as she whispered to herself, "Soon all mine." At the counter, Reynolds examined the ticket carefully. His trained eyes moved over the numbers, the barcodes, the official stamps. The machine beeped as he scanned, confirming what Megan already knew. This was a winning ticket, a very large one. But then his eyes caught something printed in the claim records, a name that flickered across his screen. His brow furrowed. For a moment he froze, his fingers tightening slightly against the paper. Jerome Walker. The name struck him like a bell tolling in the distance. He knew it. He had seen it before, long ago, not in the usual pools of everyday winners, but in the pages of financial archives, buried in the history of a man who had once been at the center of enormous wealth. Reynolds blinked slowly, composing himself. His face remained calm, professional, but his eyes darkened with thought. He glanced briefly at Megan, sitting with her leg bouncing nervously, her smile sharp and eager. Something about her didn't fit, something about the way she carried herself. Too brash, too restless. Reynolds lowered the ticket, his mind running faster. Now he remembered the articles, the whispers of Jerome Walker, the tech visionary who had vanished decades ago after tragedy struck his family. If this ticket had truly come from him, then this woman was not telling the full story. Still, Reynolds kept his posture even. He slid the ticket into a protective sleeve and left the counter quietly. His shoes clicked softly against the linoleum as he walked toward the interior offices. His expression betrayed nothing, but his thoughts weighed heavy. Megan noticed his absence stretching longer than she had expected. Her smile faltered briefly. She straightened in her chair, her hands clasping together in her lap. She told herself it was procedure, nothing more. Big wins took time to confirm. Still, a thin thread of impatience tugged at her chest. She closed her eyes again, forcing her mind back to her fantasies. A house by the ocean. A car so new it smelled like leather and promise. No more long shifts. No more tired faces. No more small-town disappointments. She imagined her name whispered with admiration, her beauty framed in expensive fabrics, her life envied by everyone who had ever doubted her. The sound of approaching footsteps pulled her back. She opened her eyes and looked toward the hallway. Mr. Reynolds was returning, but he was not alone. Beside him walked Tyler. Megan's heart stopped. Her stomach clenched so hard it felt as though the floor had dropped beneath her. Tyler's face was pale, his eyes shadowed with hurt. But there was a sharpness there, too, a determination she had never seen before. Her breath caught, panic fluttering in her chest. How had he found her? Why was he here? Reynolds carried the protective sleeve with the ticket inside. His face was calm, his voice steady as he approached. "Miss Harris," he said evenly, "would you please come with us?" Megan gripped the edges of the chair, her knuckles white. She forced her lips into a smile, though it trembled at the corners. "What is this?" she asked, her voice just above a whisper. Reynolds's eyes met hers, cool and unreadable. "Just a few questions. Standard procedure." Her gaze flicked to Tyler, standing silent but firm beside the manager. The sight of him made her chest burn. Only an hour ago he had been on his knees in a cafe, begging for her love. Now he stood here, summoned into the heart of her new world, threatening to unravel everything. The warm glow of her fantasies shattered. The waiting room suddenly felt too bright, too sterile, its walls pressing in. The other claimants shifted in their seats, their eyes wide with curiosity, as if sensing the storm building. Megan rose slowly, her legs trembling beneath her. She smoothed her coat, lifted her chin, and followed Reynolds toward the hallway. Each step echoed sharply, the sound of her heels clattering against the linoleum like a countdown she could not stop. Inside her chest, her heart pounded, not with triumph now, but with a gnawing fear she refused to name. The waiting room had grown colder, though the lights still burned with the same sterile glare. Megan felt the walls closing in as she followed Mr. Reynolds and Tyler back toward the counter. Every step echoed sharply, too loud, too final. She lowered herself onto a chair again, her hands gripping her knees, her chest rising and falling with uneven breaths. The hum of the fluorescent bulbs overhead sounded like a swarm of angry bees. Mr. Reynolds stood before her, the ticket sealed carefully inside its protective sleeve. His expression was calm, his voice professional. "Miss Harris, there are some concerns we need to address." Megan forced a smile, though her lips trembled. "Concerns? What concerns? I won fair and square. That ticket is mine." Her tone rose sharper with each word. "You have no right to question me." Tyler stood a few feet away, his jaw tight, his eyes locked on her with an intensity that cut straight through her bravado. He said nothing, but the silence between them was louder than any accusation. The door opened. Mr. Collins stepped inside, his shoulders squared, his face grave. Beside him, Jerome Walker entered slowly, his cane tapping gently against the linoleum. His dark glasses concealed his eyes, but his posture was steady, his expression calm, untouched by the chaos around him. Megan's stomach lurched. She gripped the edge of her chair, her breath catching. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice shrill. "Why is he here?" Collins ignored her protest. He held up a tablet in his hand, the small screen already glowing. "Because the truth belongs here, too." The room quieted as he pressed play. Grainy footage flickered across the display. Jerome at the counter scratching the ticket with patient hands, sliding it forward with a faint smile. Then Megan appeared, her movements quick, deliberate. The ticket disappearing into her pocket, while her other hand tossed a scrap of paper into the trash. The images spoke louder than words. The silence that followed was suffocating. Megan shot to her feet, her face flushed crimson. "That proves nothing!" she shouted. "You can't. You don't know what happened. That ticket was mine. I bought it. That old man, he probably dropped something else. You can't believe this." Her words tumbled out, frantic, jagged, her voice cracking under the strain. Jerome stood motionless, his chin lifted slightly, the faintest curve of a smile brushing his lips. He looked like a man watching a storm from a distance, untouched, unshaken. The door opened again, A woman entered, guiding a boy gently by the shoulder. Ethan stepped inside, his small hands clenched at his sides, his wide eyes darting nervously around the room. His mother whispered encouragement, her voice soft, urging him forward. Collins crouched slightly to meet the boy's gaze. "Ethan, do you remember what you told me earlier?" Ethan swallowed hard, glancing at Megan, then at Jerome, then back to his shoes. His voice was barely more than a whisper. "I saw her. I saw her put the ticket in her pocket. She smiled like she knew. Then she told him it wasn't a winner." Megan lunged forward, her hands clenched, her voice shrieking. "He's just a kid. He doesn't know what he saw. You can't trust him." Ethan flinched, pressing closer to his mother. But he didn't take his words back. His small voice carried through the heavy silence like a blade, clean and undeniable. The weight of the boy's testimony settled on the room. Megan's defenses crumbled under it. Her chest heaved, her eyes wild. She spun toward Reynolds, her voice desperate now. "You can't do this to me. That ticket is mine. It's mine." Reynolds's expression was steady, his tone firm. "Miss Harris, the evidence is clear. The ticket belongs to Mr. Walker." The words shattered her. Megan screamed, her voice raw, her body thrashing as if the sound itself could undo the truth. She lunged toward the counter, reaching for the sleeve that held the ticket, but two uniformed officers stepped in swiftly. Their hands caught her arms, pulling her back. She twisted violently, her hair falling from its tie, her face contorted with fury and fear. "Let me go!" she shrieked. "It was supposed to be mine." "You don't understand. I deserved it. I deserved it." Her voice cracked, collapsing into hoarse sobs that filled the sterile room with their jagged rhythm. Ethan buried his face against his mother's side, trembling. Tyler turned his head away, unable to watch, his chest tight with both grief and disbelief. Collins stood firm, his jaw clenched, his eyes heavy with disappointment. Jerome remained where he was, his cane steady in his hand, his frame upright behind the dark glasses. His expression stayed unreadable, but there was a gravity in his presence, a quiet authority that filled the room. He looked not like a victim, but like a man who had already known loss, already known betrayal, and carried it with the calm of one who could not be broken again. The officers pressed Megan's arms behind her, guiding her toward the door. She thrashed once more, her face red with rage, her cries echoing. "It was mine! It was mine!" But the room no longer listened. Jerome's silence weighed heavier than her screams. The sun was beginning to lower in the sky, casting a soft amber glow across the steps of the lottery center. The storm of voices inside had faded, replaced by the hush of evening air. The world outside felt calmer, almost forgiving, as though it too was ready to let go of the chaos that had filled the waiting room only moments before. Megan's cries still echoed faintly as the police escorted her away, her figure small now, swallowed by the back seat of the patrol car. The siren lights blinked once, then disappeared around the corner, leaving only silence and the faint rustle of leaves in the warm breeze. For the first time that day, the space outside the building felt wide and open, breathing again after the suffocating weight of deceit and accusation. Jerome stepped out slowly, his cane tapping gently against the pavement. The late sunlight brushed over him, gilding the edges of his worn shirt and dark glasses. There was no triumph in his stride, no boast in his expression. He walked with the calm dignity of someone who had already lived through storms far greater than this. A man who carried peace, not because he was untouched by betrayal, but because he had made his peace with it. Mr. Reynolds followed close behind, the protective sleeve still in his hand. He paused at the top of the steps, then descended carefully until he stood face to face with Jerome. His posture straightened, his tone softened with respect. He extended the ticket with both hands, his eyes steady. "Mr. Walker," Reynolds said, his voice quiet but firm, "this belongs to you." Jerome lifted his hand slowly. taking the sleeve, his fingers closing around it gently, as though the slip of paper were no different from any other. Just another small object passing through his life. He inclined his head, a faint smile brushing his lips. "Thank you," he said simply, the words carrying the weight of calm finality. Collins stood nearby, his shoulders rising and falling with the remnants of tension. His eyes followed Jerome with a mixture of relief and awe. He had always known the old man carried himself with a peculiar grace, but tonight that grace seemed larger, heavier, something he could not quite name. Tyler stepped closer too, his chest still tight with the sting of rejection, but his gaze softened as it rested on Jerome. He saw in the older man not frailty, but strength. Strength wrapped in gentleness. The kind of strength he himself longed to possess. For a moment, standing there in the fading sunlight, Tyler felt a flicker of hope that the world still held men worth admiring. Reynolds lowered his voice, leaning slightly toward Collins and Tyler, as though sharing a secret too heavy for casual ears. "You should know," he said, his eyes lingering on Jerome's steady frame. "Jerome Walker isn't just anyone. Years ago, he was the founder of one of the largest technology firms in the country. His name once filled the papers. Investors followed him. Competitors feared him. But then tragedy struck. He lost his wife and his son in an accident. After that, he vanished, walked away from the empire he built. No one knew where he went." Collins's brows furrowed, his throat tightening as he turned his gaze back to Jerome. The knowledge struck him like a quiet thunderclap. Suddenly, the old man's calm, his silence, his strange presence made sense. He wasn't just some poor blind figure at the counter. He was a man who had once held the world in his hands and chosen to set it down. Tyler felt his own chest ache as the truth settled in. He thought of the cafe, of Megan's cold words as she stepped over his heart. The memory still burned. But looking at Jerome now, he realized wealth did not always scream with extravagance. Sometimes it whispered through dignity, through patience, through the ability to withstand loss and still walk forward. Jerome said nothing. He simply stood with the ticket in hand, his shoulders straight, his chin lifted slightly toward the horizon. The breeze stirred gently through the trees, tugging at the edges of his shirt, carrying the smell of rain-soaked streets. Then, from the curb, the deep purr of an engine rolled forward. A black limousine slid into place, gleaming under the golden light. The vehicle was sleek, polished, the kind that turned heads even in the wealthiest parts of town. The driver stepped out quickly, dressed in a sharp black suit. He moved with practiced grace, rounding the car to open the rear door. The moment hung suspended. Collins and Tyler exchanged startled glances. Even Reynolds's composure faltered for a heartbeat, his eyes widening slightly before he steadied himself. The sight of the limousine transformed everything they thought they knew about Jerome. The driver bowed his head respectfully. "Mr. Walker," he said, his voice low, deferential. Jerome moved forward with measured steps. He did not rush, did not perform. His cane tapped softly against the pavement, but his shoulders carried no weakness. He paused by the open door, one hand resting lightly on the polished frame. He turned his head slightly, as if listening to the hush that had fallen around him. Collins swallowed hard, his throat dry. Tyler stood frozen, his heart thudding in his chest. They both understood now. The man they had pitied, the man they had thought of as small, ordinary, fragile. He was something else entirely. A hidden giant. Jerome lifted his chin, the faintest smile brushing his lips. His eyes, though hidden behind the dark glasses, seemed to look far beyond them all, into places they could not see, places filled with memory, with loss, with wisdom bought at a cost no fortune could repay. Without a word, he lowered himself into the limousine. The driver closed the door with a quiet, respectful click. The engine hummed. The vehicle eased away from the curb, its glossy surface catching the last streaks of sunlight as it rolled forward. Collins and Tyler remained on the steps, their eyes fixed on the retreating car. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. The truth of what they had witnessed was written across their faces. Respect, awe, and the dawning understanding that they had stood in the presence of a man who embodied more than wealth. For Jerome Walker was not simply a winner of chance. He was proof of what lay hidden behind appearances, of how easily greed could be unmasked, of how dignity could endure where fortune faltered. The limousine turned the corner and disappeared into the amber light of evening, and in the silence left behind, the image of Jerome remained, etched into their hearts, not as a frail blind man, but as a billionaire in disguise, a soul tempered by loss, a figure who carried with him the quiet weight of a lesson no one in that room would ever forget.